Here's a gentle yet powerful hook you can open with. Every grain of sand in the Middle East has a story to tell. Some whisper of ancient civilizations, others echo with the footsteps of armies, and many still carry the silent prayers of people longing for peace. Would you like me to create 3 more alternative hooks so you can choose the one that best fits your style? In the Middle East, the story of ancient civilizations and conflicts begins with Mesopotamia, often called the cradle of civilization, where the Sumerians built the earliest cities along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. These early societies thrived on farming, trade, and innovation, but they also faced disputes over fertile land and water rights, which often led to warfare between city-states like Uruk, and Lagash. Over time, larger empires rose, such as the Akkadians under Sargon, who expanded through conquest to unite the region under a single rule. Warfare became not just a matter of defense, but a means of empire building, with armies relying on chariots, bronze weapons, and strategies that influenced future generations. The Babylonians and Assyrians continued this pattern, building mighty kingdoms through military strength while leaving behind achievements in law, architecture, and culture that endured despite the violence. The Assyrians, in particular, became known for their powerful and disciplined armies, using siege warfare and psychological tactics to subdue enemies. Further to the east, the Persians established one of the largest empires in history under Cyrus the Great and Darius, extending their rule across the Middle East and beyond. Their conquests connected vast regions, though conflicts with the Greeks, such as the Persian Wars, demonstrated how power always invited resistance. Egypt, too, played its role, as pharaohs expanded into the Levant and fought to defend their borders against Hittites and others who sought control of trade routes. These centuries of clashes show how deeply warfare was tied to survival, expansion, and the ambition of rulers who saw the Middle East not only as their homeland, but as the center of the world's wealth and influence. Would you like me to continue the same way for religious and cultural struggles next? The Middle East has long been a meeting point of faiths and cultures, and this has often brought not only exchanges of ideas, but also wars that left deep marks on its history. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam were all born in this land, and with their rise came moments of unity as well as division. Early Islamic empires expanded rapidly after the 7th century, spreading not only religion but also language, art, and law. Yet this expansion also brought wars with neighboring Byzantine and Persian empires who resisted the new power. Within Islam itself, divisions between Sunni and Shia communities emerged following disputes over leadership after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, and these disagreements sometimes grew into armed conflicts that shaped political and cultural life for centuries. Later, the Crusades became one of the most dramatic examples of religious struggle, as European Christians launched campaigns to reclaim Jerusalem and the Holy Land, clashing with Muslim defenders and leaving behind both devastation and stories of heroism. The Crusades also revealed how faith could motivate both extraordinary sacrifices and ruthless violence. Beyond the battlefield, religious and cultural struggles influenced daily life, as communities of Jews, Christians, and Muslims lived side by side in cities like Baghdad, Jerusalem, and Damascus, sometimes in harmony and at other times in tension depending on the rulers in power. The Ottoman Empire, for example, created systems that allowed religious minorities to practice their faith, yet even within this framework there were uprisings and wars when balance broke down. These conflicts were never only about belief. They were also tied to power, land, and identity, but religion gave them a deeper intensity that echoed across generations and continues to shape the way the Middle East remembers its past. Do you want me to move on and write colonial influence in the same style? The age of colonial influence in the Middle East reshaped the region in ways that still affect it today, as European powers arrived with ambitions not only for trade but also for control over strategic lands and resources. The Ottoman Empire had long dominated much of the Middle East, but by the 19th century its decline opened the door for outside intervention. Britain and France, in particular, began to extend their reach, sometimes through economic dominance and sometimes through direct military presence. The construction of the Suez Canal made Egypt a critical prize, and British influence grew stronger there, while French power expanded in places like Syria and Lebanon. After World War I, the collapse of the Ottoman Empire allowed Britain and France to carve new borders. Under the Sykes-Picot Agreement, creating artificial states that did not always reflect the ethnic or religious realities of the land. Iraq, Jordan, and Palestine came under British mandate, while Syria and Lebanon were governed by France, and this foreign control often fueled resentment among local populations who felt their voices ignored. Nationalist movements grew stronger, with uprisings in Iraq, Palestine, and Syria showing resistance to colonial rulers. At the same time, the discovery of oil in the early 20th century turned the Middle East into a global focal point, and Western powers secured contracts and alliances that ensured their dominance over energy resources. Colonial strategies often played communities against one another, deepening divisions that would later erupt into conflict. The legacy of these years is still visible, as borders drawn by outsiders and systems of governance imposed from abroad left behind fragile states, unresolved disputes, and a sense of betrayal among many in the region who had hoped that the end of empire would bring freedom rather than new struggles. Shall I go ahead and expand Arab-Israeli conflicts next in the same detailed storytelling style? The Arab-Israeli conflicts form one of the most defining and painful chapters in Middle Eastern history, rooted in competing national identities, deep historical ties to the same land, and the legacies of colonial decisions. At the heart of the conflict is the land of Palestine, considered sacred by Jews, Christians, and Muslims, where centuries of coexistence were disrupted by waves of Jewish migration in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. As Jewish communities sought a homeland, tensions grew with the Arab population who feared displacement. The situation intensified after World War II and the horrors of the Holocaust, which increased global support for the creation of Israel. In 1948, the establishment of the State of Israel led to the First Arab-Israeli War, with neighboring Arab states invading in opposition, while hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were displaced, an event remembered as the Nakba, or catastrophe, by Palestinians. This was only the beginning of decades of confrontation. In 1956, the Suez Crisis brought another clash, and in 1967, the Six-Day War reshaped the map when Israel seized the West Bank, Gaza Strip, East Jerusalem, Sinai Peninsula, and Golan Heights, fueling further anger and resistance. The 1973 Yom Kippur War, led by Egypt and Syria, demonstrated the persistence of Arab efforts to reclaim lost territory. Alongside these wars, Palestinian groups, particularly the PLO, carried out resistance movements, while Israel's military responses often brought cycles of violence. Peace efforts, such as the Camp David Accords in 1978 and the Oslo Accords in the 1990s, raised hopes but failed to resolve core issues of refugees, borders, and Jerusalem. The conflicts became not only battles between states, but also struggles of identity, memory, and survival that continue to define relations in the Middle East. Shall I continue with oil and strategic interests in the same style? The discovery of oil in the Middle East during the early 20th century transformed the region into one of the most strategically important places on Earth, turning deserts into centers of wealth and drawing global powers into its affairs with increasing intensity. Petroleum reserves in countries like Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, and Kuwait quickly became essential to industrial economies, and foreign companies, especially from Britain and the United States, secured early control through contracts that often favored outsiders more than local populations. This imbalance fueled resentment, but also created new ruling elites who tied their power to oil revenues. During World War II and the Cold War, oil was not only an economic resource, but also a weapon of influence, as control over supplies meant leverage in global politics. The 1973 oil embargo by Arab states, launched in response to Western support for Israel during the Yom Kippur War, revealed how Middle Eastern oil producers could use energy as a powerful tool, shaking economies worldwide and proving the global dependence on the region. Conflicts such as the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s and the Gulf War in 1991 were deeply connected to the struggle for control over oil-rich lands and trade routes, particularly the Persian Gulf, which remains a lifeline for energy exports. Foreign military bases, arms sales, and political alliances were established under the justification of protecting oil interests, but they also deepened local tensions and feelings of exploitation. The vast revenues generated by oil wealth funded rapid modernization in some states, while in others it became a source of corruption and inequality, sparking internal strife. Thus, oil turned the Middle East into both a stage for prosperity and a battlefield of global competition, where strategic interests often overshadowed the voices of ordinary people. Do you want me to go ahead and write modern wars and proxy conflicts in the same way? In the modern era, the Middle East has been shaped by wars that often go beyond local rivalries, becoming proxy conflicts where global powers compete through regional struggles. The Iran-Iraq War from 1980 to 1988 stands as one of the bloodiest, fueled by territorial disputes, ideological differences, and the fear of revolutionary ideas spreading from Iran after 1979. Millions were killed or displaced, and yet neither side achieved decisive victory, leaving scars that still influence relations. Soon after, Iraq's invasion of Kuwait in 1990 triggered the Gulf War, where a US-led coalition intervened to protect oil interests and restore Kuwait's sovereignty, showing how quickly global powers became directly involved in Middle Eastern wars. The 2003 invasion of Iraq by the United States and its allies further destabilized the region, toppling Saddam Hussein but opening the door to sectarian violence, insurgencies, and the rise of extremist groups like Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which later evolved into ISIS. Meanwhile, the Syrian conflict beginning in 2011 became a tragic example of a modern proxy war, as local protests escalated into a civil war involving not only the Syrian government and opposition groups, but also regional and global powers including Iran, Russia, Turkey, and the United States, each backing different sides. Yemen too descended into a war where Saudi Arabia and Iran supported opposing factions, turning the country into a humanitarian crisis. These conflicts show how outside influence often amplifies local disputes, with foreign powers supplying weapons, funding, and strategies, while ordinary people suffer the consequences. The competition for influence, resources, and security has turned the Middle East into a complex chessboard, where wars are rarely isolated events but interconnected struggles that ripple across borders, shaping the politics and future of the region in profound and painful ways. Do you want me to now craft the conclusion of the entire speech in the same tone? When we look back at the long history of wars in the Middle East, what we see is not only battles and shifting borders, but the enduring human cost carried by families, communities, and entire generations. From the earliest cities of Mesopotamia to the struggles of today, this land has been a stage for ambition, faith, survival, and power, where outside influence has often deepened local wounds, and where the search for peace has too often been overshadowed by the sounds of conflict. Yet within these stories of war, there have always been people who dreamed of something different, who tilled their soil, raised their children, and prayed for a life without fear. Their quiet resilience reminds us that beyond the clash of empires and the strategies of leaders, the heart of history is always human. The lesson is not only to remember the wars, but to understand the hope that has endured alongside them, for it is in that hope that the possibility of a different future can be found. Do you want me to also add a short emotional hook line for the very beginning of the speech, to capture the audience immediately?